What would you do if your garage went up in flames? Your tools, your Harley, your father's workbench, everything you built, turned to ash. For Jack Morrison, the fire wasn't just destruction. It was a declaration of war. Because standing at the edge of his burning driveway wasn't a neighbor offering help. It was Ruth Gallagher, queen of the HOA, arms folded, watching the blaze like it was a backyard bonfire. Her words?
Chilling.
Next time, maybe you'll think twice before skipping your dues, Jack. But she didn't know who she was dealing with. What followed was one man's jaw-dropping revenge, a tale of arson, corruption, secret files, backroom deals, and the most unexpected twist of all, Jack buying the land beneath the HOA's feet and kicking them off it. This isn't just a fight over fees, it's a full-blown battle for justice in suburbia. And it's real. Every moment, every blow, every scandal. Buckle up and hit that subscribe button to follow real HOA drama, because when homeowners fight back, things get explosive. And this is just the beginning. When Jack Morrison pulled into his gravel driveway that Tuesday evening, the last thing he expected to see was a column of thick, black smoke clawing at the sky like the bony fingers of a vengeful ghost. The air tasted of burning rubber and despair. He slammed his old Ford truck into park so hard the transmission coughed, flung the door open and bolted out, his boots crunching against the gravel with each desperate step. His garage, the place that had once been a sanctuary of oil-stained tools, a meticulously restored Harley-Davidson, and his late father's hand-carved workbench, was engulfed in flames. Not just flames. Hellfire. The kind that howls like it's hungry for memories. Bear, he choked out, eyes darting to the chain-link fence next door. That's when he saw her, Mrs. Kilpatrick's golden retriever, trembling and whining, trapped between the garage and the fence, smoke swirling around its panicked eyes. Without hesitation, Jack pulled his flannel over his mouth and nose and plunged into the heat. The smoke burned his lungs like acid, and every breath was a fist to the chest. But he didn't stop.
He couldn't.
His dad used to say real men show up when others run, and damn it, Jack had run enough in life. He reached the dog, yanked at the fencing, and finally scooped the shivering creature into his arms, coughing, stumbling, nearly collapsing. He kicked the fence open and tumbled out into the open air, gasping, eyes streaming from the smoke. And that's when he heard her. Next time, maybe you'll think twice before skipping your HOA dues, Jack. He blinked through the haze. There, standing at the edge of his driveway, arms crossed like she was admiring a 4th of July fireworks show, was Ruth Gallagher, the queen of the HOA. The woman who treated neighborhood bylaws like sacred scripture and fines like confetti. You did this? Jack rasped, eyes red, voice shaking, not just from the smoke, but from a fury so raw it left splinters in his throat.
She scoffed.
Actually scoffed. The association had to take action. You were warned multiple times. Notices on the door, emails, even a payment plan. We tried to be reasonable. Jack took a shaky step forward, still holding the trembling dog. There's nothing in the bylaws about burning down property over a $90 landscaping dispute. You live under our jurisdiction, Jack, she said coolly. And that means consequences. Just then, the distant wail of sirens pierced the evening air. Jack looked back at the flames devouring his past, his father's bench turning to ash, the Harley melting like candle wax, tools liquefying into nothing, and something inside him cracked. Not a small crack. The kind that lets light in. Or fire out. He turned back to Ruth, who was still standing there like a smug statue of suburban tyranny. You messed with the wrong damn man, he muttered. She didn't hear him over the sirens. But she would. Soon enough. Because in that moment, soaked in sweat and ash, lungs screaming, heart pounding with rage, Jack Morrison didn't just lose a garage. He lit a fuse. And Ruth Gallagher had no idea the explosion that was coming. Jack Morrison didn't sleep that night. Not because he was grieving, that would come later, but because revenge had a way of keeping a man wide awake. While the last wisps of smoke curled out of the scorched shell of his garage, he sat on the porch, face still smudged with soot, eyes bloodshot, staring into the abyss of what had been his life's work. His father's workbench was now a memory charred into the concrete. The Harley? Nothing more than twisted steel and blistered chrome. And for what? A $90 fee for unauthorized ground cover. He wasn't going to cry. He wasn't going to yell. He was going to do something far more dangerous. He was going to dig. By sunrise, Jack was picking through the wreckage with a camera slung around his neck and rubber gloves on his hands. Every scorched beam, every blackened tool, every melted bolt was photographed and cataloged. Not for insurance. For evidence. The smell of chemical accelerant still lingered faintly beneath the stench of smoke, like gasoline's ghost. The fire chief, a weathered man with crow's feet and a voice like gravel, arrived just before 10 a.m. Jack met him at the perimeter. Deliberate, the chief said after a quick scan. We're finding traces of accelerant near the foundation. This wasn't a short circuit or a lightning strike. Someone wanted this to burn fast. Jack's jaw tightened. I already know who. He didn't say Ruth's name.
Not yet.
But in his gut he knew. And he had a feeling she hadn't done it alone. Later that day, he pulled up the security footage from the 2 cameras mounted on the corners of his house. The one facing the backyard was mostly useless, just smoke and shadows, but the driveway cam caught something. At 12:14 a.m., the motion sensor activated. A figure appeared, slim build, hoodie pulled low, cautious steps. Jack leaned in, heart racing. The figure crept toward the garage, paused, then crouched at the base of the structure. A flick of the wrist. A canister. A lighter. And then whoosh. Flames sprang to life, hungry and immediate. He rewound. Froze the frame. The outline was grainy, but the build was unmistakable. Dale Jensen. The same Dale who parked Ruth's car at every HOA meeting like some loyal lapdog. The same Dale who once threatened to fine Jack for excessive wind chimes. The man had HOA ink running through his veins. Jack copied the footage to a flash drive, slapped a label on it that read "Do Not Erase," and slid it into his jacket pocket. Then he picked up the phone. County Sheriff's Office. A woman answered. I need to speak to someone about arson, Jack said, his voice low and steady. I've got proof. And names. And just like that, this wasn't a garage fire anymore. It was a criminal investigation. As he hung up, Jack looked out over the charred remains of what used to be the only place he felt truly at peace. But instead of mourning, he smiled.
Just barely.
Because this fire, this cowardly, calculated attack, had backfired. Ruth and her goons thought they were sending a message. But all they did was give Jack Morrison a mission. And he was about to make them wish they'd never lit that match. Jack wasn't expecting the knock. Not at 9 at night. Not after the week he'd had. He opened the door to find a woman standing there in a black hoodie, baseball cap pulled low, eyes darting around like she expected someone to be watching. She looked like a spy from a movie, and based on the flash drive in her trembling hand, she might as well have been. You don't know me, she said, voice hushed. But I know you. I used to be on the HOA board until I quit. Or more accurately, until I stopped drinking the Kool-Aid. Jack narrowed his eyes. You got a name? Lisa, she said, glancing over her shoulder. Lisa Grant. Can I come in? He stepped aside. They sat at his kitchen table, the only part of the house untouched by smoke. Lisa looked around, taking in the charred scent that still clung to the air. I saw what happened to your garage, she said softly. I also saw Ruth standing there like she was watching a damn fireworks show. Jack's fists clenched. She didn't light the fire herself, but she gave the order. Lisa nodded. I know, and I can prove it. She slid the flash drive across the table like it was a loaded weapon. That's just part of what I've been collecting. Meeting notes, expense reports, emails Ruth thought she deleted. She's been bleeding HOA funds for years. Fancy dinners, spa retreats labeled as leadership training, even a private contractor she paid under the table to beautify her own backyard. Jack raised a brow. You kept all this? Started backing it up the moment I realized Ruth wasn't just power-hungry, she was dangerous. Obsessed with control. She's been trying to change zoning maps to expand HOA jurisdiction to the next cul-de-sac. She wanted to clean up the whole neighborhood. Her words, not mine. Jack leaned back, stunned. Why come to me now? Lisa hesitated, then met his gaze. Because when I saw your garage burn, I knew she'd gone too far. This isn't about fines or fences anymore. It's about power and fear. Jack studied her face. There was something haunted in her eyes. Like someone who'd walked through hell, realized she was part of it, and clawed her way out. You know what's even crazier? Lisa added. Ruth's real name isn't Gallagher. It's Ruth Wexler. She used to run an HOA in Scottsdale, Arizona. Got ousted after residents accused her of financial abuse and harassment. It got so bad the entire board dissolved. She vanished, moved here, changed her name, and started over. Jack blinked. She's done this before?
Yep.
And she's going to do it again, if we don't stop her. For the first time in days, Jack felt something shift. Not anger, not grief, but clarity. He hadn't just been targeted. This wasn't personal. This was a pattern. A scheme. A well-oiled tyranny with Ruth Gallagher pulling every lever. He looked down at the flash drive, then back at Lisa. You ready to testify if it comes to that? I'm done being afraid, she said. She burned the wrong man's garage. And I'm done letting her torch this neighborhood too. Jack nodded slowly. Then welcome to the rebellion. Because now he had what every resistance needed. A whistleblower. And Ruth Gallagher was about to find out what it felt like when one of her own turned against her. Most people fight their enemies with fists or lawyers. Jack Morrison chose escrow. After Lisa dropped the bombshell about Ruth's shady HOA past, Jack didn't waste a second. He knew Ruth wasn't just playing dirty. She'd practically paved the road to hell with HOA bylaws and petty fines. But while she obsessed over mailbox colors and lawn heights, Jack had his eyes on something bigger. He wanted the land beneath her throne. Jack picked up the phone and called his oldest friend, Mike Reynolds, a hotshot commercial realtor who usually dealt in malls and medical plazas, not HOA warfare. But the moment Mike heard the story, he was in. Let me guess, Mike said. She's got the HOA tied up in more red tape than a Christmas present, but she forgot to pay the taxes on the land they meet on? Bingo. It didn't take long for Mike to confirm what Jack hoped. The HOA was, in fact, delinquent on property taxes for 3 parcels: the community clubhouse, the adjacent park, and the sliver of land where the HOA office sat like a smug little fortress. Turns out, Ruth had spent so much time micromanaging people's porch lights, she forgot about paying Uncle Sam. Bad move. The county has liens on all 3, Mike said. And they're open to private offers before it goes into foreclosure. I can start the paperwork today. Jack didn't blink.
Do it.
I'll wire you the money by noon. And he did. Every cent he had squirreled away, old savings, a rainy day fund, even the cash he'd planned to use rebuilding his garage, was funneled into what he called Operation by the battlefield. Within 48 hours, the paperwork was processed.
The ink was dry.
The land that the HOA strutted around on like little suburban emperors now belonged to Jack Morrison. He held the freshly notarized deed in his hands and let out a long, slow breath. It felt less like a legal document and more like a sword, and he planned to use it accordingly. The next morning, he made his move. He walked straight up to the HOA's front door, deed in hand, cowboy boots echoing on the concrete path like war drums. Ruth was there, of course, arms folded, flanked by 2 of her ever-faithful minions who looked like they'd just finished measuring someone's grass for violations. Jack, Ruth said, her lips curling in that ever-condescending sneer. Unless you've come to finally pay your dues. He held out the deed. Her words stopped midair. What is this? This, Jack said, is the deed to this property. And the park. And your little clubhouse. Effective immediately. You and your HOA have 48 hours to vacate. Or you'll be trespassing. On my land. Her hand shook as she grabbed the document, eyes scanning the legal text, her jaw tightening with every line. Her voice came out small and breathy. This can't be legal. Jack folded his arms and smiled, slow and deliberate. It's exactly legal. County records are updated. You lost the land because you were too busy policing bird feeders to pay the taxes. One of her lackeys leaned in to peek at the paper, then took a cautious step back like it might explode. Ruth just stood there, stunned, like someone had unplugged her entire personality. No snarky comeback. No finger-pointing. Just silence, and the dawning horror that she'd been outplayed on her own turf. Jack didn't gloat. He didn't need to. Because standing there in the morning sun, holding the deed to her empire, he didn't just own the land. He owned the moment. And Ruth Gallagher? She knew it. Dale Jensen wasn't exactly a criminal mastermind. He was the kind of guy who thought wearing sunglasses at night made him stealthy, and that deleting his search history was the same as covering his tracks. So, when the county sheriff's deputies showed up at his apartment with a warrant for arson and a grainy video of him setting Jack's garage ablaze, he folded faster than a cheap lawn chair. The cuffs clicked around his wrists just as he tried to explain that it was all part of a community enforcement protocol.
Yeah.
Nice try, Smokey. By noon, word of Dale's arrest spread like a California wildfire through the neighborhood's group chats, Facebook threads, and front porch gossip circles. You could practically hear the collective gasp ripple across the cul-de-sac as residents processed the news. Someone from the HOA had actually gone to jail. And not for a parking violation, but arson. It was the crack in the dam. And Jack made damn sure the rest of it broke. That afternoon, he walked up to the HOA office, now sitting smugly on land that legally belonged to him, with a hammer, a ladder, and a notice printed in bold black letters. This property is now under private ownership. All former HOA personnel must vacate within 48 hours. Any continued presence will be considered trespassing and prosecuted accordingly. He nailed it right to the front door. The sound echoed through the still, stunned street like the first bell of a title fight. By sunset, residents were already drifting by to gawk.
Kids on bikes slowed down.
Retirees peeked through their blinds. A group of neighbors huddled on a corner like they were watching a live courtroom drama unfold in real time. And right on cue, Ruth Gallagher stormed onto the scene. She wasn't in her usual power blazer and pearls. She looked off, disheveled, flustered, like someone who hadn't slept since Dale's mugshot hit the local news ticker. "You can't do this, Jack," she snapped, storming up the steps, voice tight with panic. "This is still HOA property." Jack turned, calm as a monk in a thunderstorm.
It was.
"Now it's mine." He pulled the deed from a manila envelope and held it out like a final verdict. The county seal shimmered in the sunlight like poetic justice. Ruth snatched it, eyes darting across the page as her hands began to tremble. "There's no way this is binding. We were never notified. We had plans to pay those taxes." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Yeah? Before or after you spent HOA funds on a private gazebo in your backyard?" She looked up, her face pale now. The fire in her voice had flickered. For the first time, Jack saw something new behind her eyes.
Fear.
She tried to summon the old Ruth, the one who could silence a room with a raised brow or an email in all caps, but it didn't land this time. Not with Dale in jail. Not with her name trending in the neighborhood under hashtags like #HOA burnout and #Queen of Fines. Jack stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "You burned down my past, Ruth. I just bought your future." She stared at him, lips twitching, searching for something, control, a comeback, a clause in a bylaw she could twist. But all she found was silence and the weight of her own downfall. She turned, shaky, and walked away without another word. And as she disappeared down the path, the neighborhood behind her began to wake up, whispers turning to laughter, tension unraveling like a knotted rope. The spell was breaking. Ruth Gallagher had ruled this street like a queen.
But now?
She was just another neighbor. And her crown had just hit the pavement. The HOA office had always felt cold. Even in summer, even with sunshine pouring through its windows, it carried the chill of fear. For years, residents had walked through its doors with heads low and stomachs tight, worried over the next fine, the next warning, the next smile that didn't reach Ruth Gallagher's eyes. But now, the door creaked open for a different reason. Jack, Lisa, and a handful of determined neighbors, people who had once whispered at mailboxes and glanced over their shoulders at backyard barbecues, stepped inside, flashlights in hand, gloves on, hearts pounding. They weren't burglars. They were truth seekers. And they were about to discover just how rotten the roots of Ruth's empire had grown. The office smelled like old paper and stale authority. A layer of dust coated the shelves, but the filing cabinets were still locked tight. "Got it," Lisa said, holding up a ring of keys she'd swiped back when she quit the board. She moved to the largest cabinet and clicked it open. The first drawer was filled with manila folders, hundreds of them, alphabetized, labeled by street name. Jack pulled one out. It had his neighbor's name on it. Diane Roth, 117 Sycamore. He opened it. Inside were handwritten notes. Single mom. Late on mortgage. Hasn't paid last 2 HOA fines. Might not fight back if pushed. Another line below. Garage door color, not compliant. Possible violation to pursue. He looked up, his face stony. They were targeting people. Not for breaking rules, but for being vulnerable. Lisa nodded, her face pale. Keep reading. Folder after folder revealed the same story, surveillance disguised as oversight. Notes about who had recently lost jobs, who was recovering from illness, who had gone through divorce. All annotated like data points on a marketing chart. Only instead of selling products, Ruth was selling fear. One folder held emails between Ruth and Dale. Target Patricia on Hemlock. She just lost her husband. Start with landscaping violations. She'll fold fast. Another file was labeled Expansion Strategy. It contained maps, zoning proposals, and emails to a land use attorney. Ruth had been preparing to annex the neighboring block into HOA control. She even drafted talking points to sell it to current residents, phrases like improved community standards and increased property values printed in bold. Holy hell, Jack muttered. She wasn't just abusing power. She was building an empire. At the back of the filing cabinet, Lisa found a sealed envelope marked Confidential, Internal Use Only. Inside were draft scripts for board members to use during HOA meetings, how to deflect accusations, how to shame dissenters, how to remind residents of their contractual obligations without directly addressing their concerns. "This is a playbook for manipulation," Lisa whispered. She trained them to gaslight the whole damn neighborhood. Jack ran a hand over his face, furious and sick all at once. These weren't just documents. They were weapons. And for years, Ruth had been firing them at the easiest targets, those too tired, too scared, or too alone to fight back. Denise, one of the residents who joined the team that day, held up her own file. "There's stuff in here about my son.
He's 10.
What the hell does his special needs diagnosis have to do with HOA regulations?" The room went silent. Then Jack stood up. "We're not sitting on this," he said. "We're going to show the neighborhood everything." Because now, it wasn't just about reclaiming property. It was about reclaiming dignity. And the next HOA meeting wouldn't be a meeting at all. It would be a reckoning. Jack Morrison had always preferred tools to touch screens. He was the kind of guy who kept his phone in a drawer during dinner and still signed emails with "sent from my desktop." But this called for something a little more digital. He sat at his kitchen table, the same one where Lisa had slid him that damning flash drive, and opened his laptop with fingers that trembled, not from fear, but purpose. On his screen was the freeze-frame image of Ruth Gallagher standing smugly at the edge of his burning garage, arms crossed, a smirk slicing across her face like a blade. Behind her, the fire devoured years of memories, and in front of her, the microphone of Jack's doorbell camera catching her every word. "Maybe next time you'll think twice before skipping your HOA dues, Jack." Jack spliced that line with the footage of Dale lighting the fire, the HOA's secret files scanned and scrolling, and Lisa narrating a voiceover like a whistleblower from a Netflix docuseries. It wasn't just a video. It was a bomb, carefully packed, emotionally loaded, and ready to explode across the internet. He titled it, "This is what my HOA did to me." And then he hit upload. Within an hour, The video had 5,000 views. By the time Jack made himself a sandwich, it had crossed 20,000. By the time he finished eating, his inbox was flooded with messages, neighbors, journalists, even a former HOA board member from Arizona who recognized Ruth by another name, Ruth Wexler. Local media picked it up first. Suburban nightmare. Man claims HOA burned his garage over fees. Then regional. Within 48 hours, the video was sitting pretty at over 1 million views, trending on platforms Jack didn't even know existed. People weren't just watching, they were outraged. Comment sections lit up with stories from folks across the country who'd also been terrorized by their HOAs. One user wrote, "This is why I rent." Another said, "I'd watch a whole series on Jack versus Ruth. Team Jack all the way." It wasn't just cathartic. It was viral. Then came the knock on Ruth's door, not from a neighbor, but from the local news team and, shortly after, county investigators. The clips of her laughing while Jack's life went up in flames were now plastered across TV screens and TikTok reels nationwide. Her empire, once built on silence and fear, was now buried under a landslide of public fury. Jack watched it unfold not with glee, but with grim satisfaction. This wasn't revenge. This was justice digitized and distributed. At the next impromptu community gathering, no longer held in secret, Jack stood under the gazebo, the one Ruth had built with HOA money for her own parties, and addressed the growing crowd. "I didn't expect to go viral," he said, adjusting the mic someone had loaned him. "Hell, I didn't even know what duet meant until last night. But I do know this, truth moves fast. And now that everyone's seen what's behind that HOA curtain, we're not going back." Cheers erupted, not wild or celebratory, but steady, like a community finally exhaling after years of holding its breath. Lisa stepped beside him, holding a printout from the county's official statement. "A formal investigation into the Green Pines HOA has been opened due to allegations of financial misconduct, property damage, and civil rights violations." Ruth didn't show her face that day. Or the next. For once, she had nothing to say. No warnings. No notices. No rules. Just silence. And Jack? He learned something new in the midst of it all. Sometimes the most powerful tool isn't a wrench or a lawsuit. It's a camera, and the truth it can capture in 4K. And sometimes, all it takes to bring down a tyrant is a good Wi-Fi connection. Just when Jack Morrison thought the storm had passed, it came back in a tailored suit and a certified envelope. It arrived on a gray Thursday morning, hand-delivered by a courier who looked like he'd rather be doing anything else. Jack opened the thick stack of legal papers at his kitchen counter, his coffee going cold as he read the allegations. Illegal displacement of a governing body. Personal interference with property values. Intentional disruption of a structured community. In other words, he'd poked the HOA dragon, and the smoke was still trying to choke him out. The plaintiffs? A group of former board members, self-declared protectors of suburban order, who believed Jack's hostile takeover had led to a drop in their home values, never mind the fact that Ruth's regime had been embezzling funds, starting fires, and documenting residents like it was a Cold War dossier. No, according to them, Jack was the villain. Jack didn't panic. He picked up the phone and called Eleanor Briggs, a sharp-witted real estate and property law attorney with a spine of steel and a resume full of HOA takedowns. She'd helped him navigate the land purchase, and when she heard about the lawsuit, she let out a low chuckle. "Oh, they're serious," she said, skimming the complaint. "But stupid. This is a tantrum dressed up as litigation." Jack grinned. "Good. Let's go on the offensive." They filed a counterclaim for defamation and malicious prosecution, backed by mountains of evidence. Everything from the tax documents proving legal ownership of the land to the video of Ruth smirking beside the fire, to the HOA's secret files targeting vulnerable residents. The court date was set, and when Jack walked into that courtroom, he wasn't just prepared, he was loaded for bear. The HOA's attorney, a slick, silver-haired man who talked like a cruise ship host, tried to paint Jack as a power-hungry rogue who had undermined the fabric of the community. Jack didn't even flinch. When it was his turn, he stood tall in front of the judge and laid it all out. The financial records showing misuse of HOA funds. The emails Ruth had sent instructing fines against widows and the unemployed. The expansion plan to annex neighboring blocks through legal trickery. And finally, the security footage. The match that lit the truth. Dale, the HOA's own enforcer, caught on camera committing arson. The judge watched silently. The courtroom was so still you could hear a sigh of disbelief ripple through the gallery. Jack finished his testimony calmly. Your Honor, I didn't dismantle the HOA. They collapsed under their own corruption. All I did was step in before they dragged the rest of the community down with them. The ruling came swift and sharp.
Case dismissed.
Entirely. But that wasn't the end. Eleanor leaned in and whispered, "They're on the ropes. Let's end it." Jack nodded. He offered them a choice: walk away quietly or face a drawn-out defamation trial that would open every dirty drawer Ruth had ever filled. They chose the former. In the final settlement, the ex-board members were required to sign a legal agreement stating they would never again attempt to form, revive, or represent any HOA or similar entity in the neighborhood.
Ever.
They signed, hands shaking. When Jack stepped outside the courthouse, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time that day. Neighbors were waiting. A few clapped. Some just smiled. No speeches. No victory lap. Just quiet vindication. He had fought their battle in court and won. But more than that, he had done the impossible. He'd put the HOA in the ground and buried it in law. The day the HOA officially dissolved, nobody popped champagne. There were no marching bands, no victory banners, and certainly no Ruth Gallagher with her clipboard barking out parking violations. But for the first time in years, the neighborhood exhaled. Jack stood at the edge of the park, the one he now owned but refused to fence off, watching as kids played tag in the grass without their parents glancing nervously at their watches, calculating when the HOA patrol would swing by. A barbecue sizzled nearby, laughter echoed down Sycamore Lane, and the air felt different. Lighter. The HOA office?
Locked.
Empty. Already overtaken by ivy and a stray paper sign Jack had slapped on the door weeks ago. Closed for good. Enjoy your freedom. But it wasn't just about ending something. It was about starting something new. At a neighborhood gathering that weekend. No formal agenda, no roll call, just lawn chairs and iced tea. Jack proposed the idea of a volunteer community committee. Not one with fines or fees or bylaws written in legalese. Just a handful of folks willing to help organize events, coordinate yard cleanups, and look out for one another like neighbors used to do before power corrupted the welcome signs. No authority. No punishments, Jack said, standing under the shade of an old oak. Just cooperation. We fix what needs fixing. We help where we can. And if someone paints their mailbox neon pink, well, maybe we just call it personality. The crowd chuckled. Someone clapped. And then another. And then the whole park erupted in a warm round of approval. A few days later, a group of teens helped repaint the community benches. A retired veteran named Marvin built a free little library box from scratch. And people started planting flowers, all kinds, not just the HOA-approved petunias. There were tulips, marigolds, wild lavender, and even a wildly defiant cactus or two. It was chaotic, colorful, and absolutely beautiful. One afternoon, as Jack was fixing a fence post near the edge of the block, he heard the soft shuffle of footsteps behind him. He turned to see Mrs. Helen Ramirez, cane in hand, sun hat low, with her signature red lipstick and a gaze that had weathered more storms than most. Helen had lived in the neighborhood for 43 years. She'd been fined 12 times by the old HOA for excessive foliage and non-compliant garden gnomes. Once, Ruth had even tried to force her to sell after she refused to remove her beloved plum tree.
Now,
that tree stood taller than ever, its blossoms catching the breeze like nature's rebellion. Helen looked around, her eyes glistening. "I used to sit on my porch," she said, voice thick with emotion, "and wonder if I'd die before someone stood up to them. Before things got better. Before we got our homes back." Jack paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "Well, you lived to see it, Helen." She chuckled, then reached out and touched his arm, her hand small but steady. "I did. And it's more beautiful than I ever imagined." Then she added, her voice cracking just enough to make him swallow hard. "I never thought I'd live long enough to feel free in my own yard." Jack didn't say anything. He didn't have to. Because this wasn't about lawns or permits or fees. It was about dignity. About finally unshackling an entire community from the fear of its own rules. The HOA had ruled with iron. Now the neighborhood thrived with heart. And for the first time in a long time, no one was afraid to plant something that wasn't approved. Jack Morrison thought it was over. The lawsuits were buried. The bylaws were gone. The neighborhood had found its rhythm, like a small-town heartbeat returned to normal after years of palpitations. People waved again. Kids chalked the sidewalks. And the mailbox police had officially retired. But tyrants rarely go quietly. One muggy Tuesday morning, an envelope showed up in Jack's mailbox. No return address, his name scribbled in uneven, almost frantic handwriting. Inside, on thick, scented stationery that still reeked of condescension, was a message from the ghost of the past. "Without a governing body, this neighborhood will crumble. Property values will fall. Crime will rise. I'll be watching when it does. You've doomed them all, Jack." It wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. Only one person in Green Pines wrote in cursive with that much drama: Ruth Gallagher. Jack didn't bother replying. Instead, he walked door to door, just like he had during the fight, this time with a simple petition: say no to the new HOA. It was clear Ruth was attempting a comeback, trying to recruit support under a new name, a fresh start. But the neighborhood wasn't the same. They'd tasted freedom. And they weren't about to go back to checking their grass length with a ruler. Within 48 hours, the petition had more signatures than the original HOA ever had members. Even quiet neighbors, the ones who'd never so much as waved, were suddenly eager to make sure Ruth stayed gone. One resident wrote in the margins, "Tell her we're allergic to clipboards now." Another simply added, #never again. The message was clear. Ruth's reign wasn't just over. It had been rejected by the very people she once ruled. And just like that, Ruth Gallagher disappeared. No final speech. No exit parade. One evening, a for sale sign quietly appeared on her front lawn. A week later, her Lexus was gone, the shutters closed, and the porch lights permanently dark. Some said she moved to Florida. Others claimed they saw her poking around a gated community 3 towns over. Jack didn't care, because for the first time in years, Ruth wasn't in charge. She was just a footnote. That summer, Jack finished rebuilding his garage. It took time, sweat, and more late nights than he'd like to admit, but when it was done, it wasn't just a structure. It was a symbol. The new garage stood exactly where the old one had burned, only taller, stronger, and fireproofed like a fortress. It smelled of sawdust and second chances. One afternoon, as Jack stood in the driveway admiring his work, a familiar voice broke the stillness. "Hell of a thing you pulled off." He turned to see Frank Douglas, the retired Marine who once avoided HOA meetings like they were enemy territory. He wore his usual worn jeans, boots, and a crooked smile. "You did something the rest of us only dreamed of," Frank said, nodding toward the neighborhood. "You gave us back our homes." Jack shrugged. "All I did was buy some land and shine a light on the rats." Frank grinned.
Nah.
"You did more than that. You broke the cycle. Now we get to live, not comply." Jack looked out at the block. A little girl rode her bike through the street with streamers on her handlebars. A woman was planting sunflowers next to a flamingo statue the old HOA would have fined her for. A couple teenagers were building a tree swing in the park. There were no warnings taped to doors. No whispers of fines. Just laughter, movement, and life. He smiled. A slow, quiet smile. "Yeah," he said. "We're finally free. No more HOA. No more fear. Just neighbors.
Just people.
Just home."